Welcome back to the Respect the Drive podcast. I'm Tedward of Tedward Drives and Winding Road Magazine. We're here at Garage 42 with the owner of Garage 42 and its sister, or brother, or cousin company, Rennscot. This is David Bamforth, and he's like a local car enthusiast who he likes to make his ideas happen. So, welcome.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
In your own shop.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, look, like most of my friends at this point, I met you in a parking lot.
Yeah, the same parking lot I met most of my friends, or at least the friend who introduced me to my other friends.
But for background to the viewers, I mean, I think a lot of people know who you are from, or who follow me. They know you because of the Miata trip, because we drove across the country in a $1,400 Miata. That was rough.
Yeah, that was an experience, and it was a great bonding opportunity.
It was good. It was like you're what, 8 years younger than me? 9,
7.5,
something like that. Yeah. So I was always fine with the younger people, but when I met you, it was like finding this like little brother. Now, the difference between you and a lot of younger people that I've met, that I've become friends with, is over time their age shows through, and I start to see like this immaturity and this like, you're like, okay, he's 10 years younger than me, and things happen. With you were always more adventurous but not stupid, and I'm like the most conservative person in the world when it comes to risk. You're quite the opposite. And it's balanced me out quite a bit. The fact that we're even sitting here right now doing this podcast speaks volumes to your influence on me.
Yeah. I definitely like rolling the dice a little, or at least making some calculated risks, especially when it comes to business and making really big dreams and actually trying to make them happen. At least attempt to pursue them.
Where were you? You weren't born American. Where'd you come from?
No, so I was born in the UK, just outside of London, and then lived there until I was 3, and then came over with my parents and my sister, and have lived here ever since. So basically 20 years now. Where's
the car passion come into play?
Yeah, so good question. I was like always kind of into cars. When I was in like elementary school or middle school, it was definitely like the thing that was most interested me. I used to on my mom's side, my nan and papa, or my grandparents, my papa would always send us like letters or like packages every like couple of weeks, and my sister would always get one with a comic book in it. I think it was called the B&O, which was like a British comic book that she liked, and I would always get Top Gear magazines every single time.
Really? So it's funny. I've never had a Top Gear print magazine.
No, I have a stack of them. I have a full like couple shelves in my bedroom still with all of those on there. So I would always see those and look at the cars on them and look through the pictures. I'm dyslexic, so I didn't read anything in them, but I looked at the photos and it was pretty cool. And always pulled out any posters that were there and put them on my wall. And I had a couple poster cars, as most of us did in elementary and middle school. So definitely had like a manual Lamborghini Gallardo, Murcielago, an F430, and an Enzo. Those are my 4. And so I was like into cars quite a bit, but I didn't have anyone else who even knew what Top Gear was when I was in elementary school or middle school. I was struggling to find it on TV or watch episodes of it, and I would find them online.
Yeah, we had to find them. Yeah. I remember when I was in college, so somewhere around 2006, 2007, I remember walking downstairs in my dorm and seeing some kid watching the Top Gear episode of the 997 Turbo. And it was that blue, it was like a night shoot. Clarkson's driving it out of a parking garage. And I remember being like, oh my God, a guy who knows I know what that is. And the guy looked at me like, of course, the whole world knows what this is, you asshole. We've been downloading it for, a decade. But yeah, to me, that was like a big deal that somebody knew what it was.
Yeah. And especially at my age, unless someone else's parents were British, like nobody else knew what it was, even if they were into cars. There was like one other kid, George Britton, who actually has quite a strong relationship with Ace Performance. So somehow we've stayed in the kind of local community. But it was like just me and him who knew what Top Gear was, and we would talk about it. And eventually episodes ended up making their way onto onto the US TV, I think on Science Channel maybe or something. But it was like way too late at night for me to watch it, so usually I had to wait for reruns to come on, or I would have to record it or something. But I just remember finding them so funny, like the crazy adventures that they would get into, and then Ferrari's always breaking down, or they would do the convertible challenge where none of their navigation would work and none of their soft ops would work. And
well, you'd see nuances on cars that you otherwise would never know. I mean,
Yeah.
no one would know that like it's difficult to operate a Ferrari navigation system. Like those weren't. How
Yeah.
would I know that? But so since then, I mean, you've gone through your school years. You've graduated as a mechanical engineer. And you mentioned you're dyslexic. What is that, I guess, how does that come into play when it comes to you either creating something or, I mean, there's got to be a pro and con to that, right? I mean, you've done more stuff than I've seen a lot of people do. And it's not just because of funding, it's because you are like fearless. And at the same time, you've got this thing that holds you back and makes things more complicated. But how do you navigate that?
Yeah, well, to a degree, I would say my first like big challenging thing that I ended up having to go through the process of tackling and kind of getting over was dyslexia. So that was my first intro into like, here's a big challenge or big, well, it's not really a dream or a goal, but I had to figure out how to read and how to function as a typical human. So I went to an elementary middle school that was focused for kids with dyslexia called Carroll School, and by the end of that, I was reading at the same level as everyone else and pretty much functioning as everyone else. But it was really challenging for those 8 years, and it still carried into high school, and I was still had like a tutor that I met with regularly in high school. But I went to a high school that was really supportive of kids with learning disabilities. So I nowadays I'm really not of the thinking that my dyslexia held me back in any way or currently makes it any harder to do anything. It obviously was a big challenge at the beginning, but now it really doesn't affect me on my day-to-day life. So I think that was probably the very first big challenge. It was like, okay, like I fully came through this challenge and came over it and kind of reached the goal. And that motivation is probably what gives me so much confidence nowadays to find other goals and other really challenging things, or just big kind of crazy goals, and to just take them on and just do them.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like where I was talking to Zach about this in another episode, but confidence, like he said something about being confident as a salesperson. And I was like, where do you even get that? Because you are confident in a way that isn't overwhelming. You're not cocky, but you'll do stuff that I think, like I've told you, we shouldn't do this. I mean, how many times have we gotten stuck in the truck? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, David, we can't make it. And we do inevitably get stuck, but we also get out. I don't know where the hell this comes from. Why does your brain work this way, and how can you transmit that to other people?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting. I think there's different reasoning for different things. Like when it comes to driving, my ability to have very good spatial awareness is kind of a skill that maybe comes from the my brain functioning differently, and my ability to drive large vehicles through very tight city streets is pretty good, and I do it completely subconsciously without even thinking about it.
I can attest your Raptor, Cambridge, Harvard Square skills are psychotic.
Yeah, and usually I can hear the person next to me, grabbing a door handle or
I would like to say that I doubt you all the time. And I've learned to just accept that it's my own shit to deal with, not yours. Like There's people where like you're in the passenger seat and you're like, please don't do that. Whereas like when it's you, I usually realize I'm like, yeah, he usually gets by. We'll be okay. Oh my God, we'll be okay.
Yeah. So I think, there's a whole bunch of science and understanding behind dyslexia, but there's really the biggest thing behind it is that it really changes kind of the wiring, the way that brains can function. So even though it does cause this big fault in the ability to read, it usually also comes through with some ability to be a really good problem solver and also be like a very fast thinker. There's a long list of entrepreneurs or business people who are dyslexic, who even lots of them never even got over their dyslexia and can barely write nowadays, but their ability to take on challenges and pursue them through and problem solve is definitely one that's probably greater than your average non-dyslexic person.
Do you think that contributes? Like, you have an obsessive nature. When you find a thing that you like, it's like an 8-year-old with a Pokemon card. Like, you know everything about the thing that you like. Like, where does that come from? Is that just how you were raised? Is that the dyslexia? Is that just your personality? Like,
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. I would say my biggest motivator in anything I do is probably just learning. Like, well, without a doubt, which is kind of crazy for being dyslexic. I feel like most people are probably under the assumption that like, oh, he's dyslexic, he must have hated school and hated learning. But as long as the subject was one that I liked, I could usually get myself through those subjects I didn't like, and then the subjects I did love, I really fully loved. And so. And then also the ability that you get nowadays with information being so readily available and really understanding the way that you learn. Like, I'm such an autodidact, which is someone who's good at self-teaching or self-learning. So I'm a very like audio-visual person where I need to have visuals to support the audio and vice versa. So
I apologize. This is a podcast.
Yeah, good thing I'm not trying to learn anything complicated right now. But yeah, so like learning stuff through YouTube is like how I learned so many things. Like learning is the motivator for everything I do, even when it comes to work stuff. Like if we like I would love to find some more complicated work for materials that we've never tackled, not because I think it's a good business pursuit, but more just I just feel like we're pretty competent in making stuff out of aluminum, so would love to do some titanium stuff. But that's really the motivator for everything. Whether it comes to like making something for my car, like right now I'm making this absolutely silly pie cut titanium exhaust that there's like three 90-degree bends right next to each other, and each 90-degree bend is made out of 20 parts or 10 parts. So there's 30 parts right next to each other. They each need to be welded. So, the total welding length is like dozens of feet of welding, and it's a ton of work and way more work than I should be putting into the project. But my whole motivator for that was just I really wanted to learn how to weld titanium, and no better way to do it than just to do a hell of a lot of it.
And that's on your 987 Cayman S.
Yeah. So a car that doesn't deserve this exhaust either. But I somehow convinced myself that it was financially more sound for me to consume a whole bunch of my time, and at least the materials are cheaper than buying an off-the-shelf stainless exhaust. So I can kind of convince myself into it that way.
Yeah,
but
as long as you don't charge yourself the labor, you're in the clear.
Yeah, exactly. I'm doing it after hours. So, but at the end of the day, I'll come out of it being like a pretty competent welder of titanium exhaust, which is a skill I've always wanted to learn. And there's so many other projects that have been like that. Building my cage, which you helped me with over a couple weekends, was a big learning opportunity.
That was a lot of work.
Yeah. And
a little bit of luck. I think every time we bent a tube, we went back. We might have had to adjust them a little bit, but the fact that thing fit in the car, that will never not blow my mind.
Yeah, and it learning, like you go into those and you're like, like I think I've done my math. I know how much tubing I need. I know what these bends need to look like. But actually doing it, especially for the first time, it's kind of that difference. How does the analogy go? But there's a difference between knowing something and like understanding something.
Yeah.
And like I can know how to build a cage, but actually to deeply understand how to do it requires the ability to know so many subtle nuances of how to make sure those tubes fit up perfectly. Because if they're not perfectly fit up, then you'll weld one section and it will shrink or pull, and then the whole thing's warped and off, and there's so many subtle nuances. So you can really learn something, but to actually know it, you really have to do it. But I love that process, and actually,
yeah, I think that's why you like doing things with you, and you encouraging me to just act on things helps me learn, because I get overwhelmed, even with like, let's say the podcast, for example. It took me a long time to research and decide what microphones, what recording device, how am I going to do this, where am I going to do this, all this stuff. And it's like you can just get so caught up. And if you're a gearhead like me, where like, you know, I'm always looking at cameras. I just want the latest and greatest, but I can't afford it. So you have to be very, very cautious about what you buy and when you buy and how you buy. Eventually you get to a point where you're just stalled because you're like, oh, I could stare at this A7 III all day and then compare it against the Canon EOS R, but I know that they're going to come out with new stuff. And then you end up not doing anything and you never learn. Whereas like, you're just like, just get the thing that you think is reasonable. It'll be enough. And you'll learn whether or not that worked or not. But I want to get into Rennscot a little bit because I don't know if people really, A, even know what Rennscot is. And B, what do you want it to be? So tell us what the business is.
Yeah. So Rennscot started out originally as just a way for me to get parts cheap. Really, you know, every car guy's dream.
Classic.
So I was actually going up while I was still in college, going up to visit some friends at UVM. And while I was up there, I realized that Rennline was right nearby. Rennline's a big, probably the biggest Porsche aftermarket parts manufacturer.
I have a lot of Rennline stuff on my 911.
Yeah, we're both guilty of that.
Heavily Rennline outfit.
Yeah, so I think I was still staying up there through the Monday and then heading back down to Massachusetts. So I gave them a call and asked them if I could come by to buy some stuff, and they were like, "We don't usually have people come by to buy stuff.
Yeah, in the middle of nowhere.
But sure, yeah, we're in the Vermont, not Porsche Central or anything like that, not Southern California like we would all probably assume.
Right.
So I went up there and I got a tour by their vice president, who I was kind of shocked to be talking to him, and went around and walked around there for a couple hours, ate some great old pizza in the fridge that was perfect, and bought a couple parts from them. But while I was there, I talked to them, and you know, I did the thing that we've probably all done when we thought we were probably bigger fish in the sea than we were, and asked them if they sponsored builds or did discounts or stuff. Which now, being in the industry, I realize how kind of annoying that is.
I've got 1,000 followers. Could you just like give me 10 grand worth of parts?
Yeah. And at this point, I was like, I had no followers. I was just like, I'll put your sticker on my car.
Yeah.
Not realizing that has to equate to, you know, value for them that matches the amount of money they just gave off. But they're very courteous, and the guy was like, we don't really do that, but we can set you up with a wholesale account if you want to become a dealer for us. And I was like, what do I have to do that? Because I had always been thinking through college, like, oh, I really want to start a business, and I had a bunch of ideas, but it was just which one was the right one, and I didn't know, you know, what to actually do. So I was like, this guy's telling me to start a business. Sounds like this is the idea.
Classic David.
Yeah. So
needed one little baby push over the edge, and boom, LLC. Done.
Yeah, exactly. So literally, probably by the next week, just now, like 3 years ago, as of May, I started the LLC called Rennscot. And you know, I had this wholesale account, didn't really know how it worked or anything, or how being a aftermarket parts dealer worked, but I knew I could order parts for myself and get a discount, so that was nice. And but I would, you know, kind of troll the Facebook groups, go on the forums. If someone was asking about what sway bar they would get, I would comment and, you know, say, if you need help getting this, let me know. And you know, I actually got like quite a few sales that way, and it was pretty amazing that I was able to put that together and see that there was actually a potential for this to actually be more than just a side hobby or anything like that.
Yeah, it's like the real life equivalent of when a YouTuber has an affiliate link.
Yeah.
It's like, exactly. I get $50 every time you buy a Corsa exhaust using coupon code Tedward.
Yep, exactly. And there's always things about like, oh, you can't discount stuff, so you offer free shipping or stuff like that. Right. But yeah, there's plenty of ways to kind of sweeten the deal.
I'm glad you did that instead of like entering some pyramid scheme where they're like, oh yeah, just buy this inventory and sell it, and then get 5 of your friends.
Yeah, me too.
You definitely weren't stupid. You didn't get involved in anything dangerous, and you got involved with like good people. The Rennline guys are awesome.
Yeah, they are amazing, and it was perfect because it was drop shipping, so I had no inventory tied up. So it was perfect. I only made money when I sold stuff, and otherwise I was still just broke. So
right, and then that's when you decided I would like to make stuff myself, right?
Yeah. So at this time, I was a sophomore in college, and I was studying mechanical engineering with a minor in manufacturing. So I knew my focus was going to be manufacturing based. So the school year after that, in the spring term, I did an internship at Rolls-Royce Manufacturing, at not the automaker Rolls-Royce, but at Rolls-Royce, the engineering company.
For like jet engines.
Yeah. So they do jet engines, but I worked on the naval side. So we made propellers, and big propellers, like 65,000 pound, like 16 foot in diameter propellers for U.S. Navy destroyers. So the scale of manufacturing was absurd.
People are starting to get the idea probably by now that you are like that 4-year-old that if he sees construction, like the family car needs to stop and we need to watch this for 20 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Except you're like in your 20s and that's still your life.
Yeah. No. I can share a great picture with you of me when I was 3, like wearing a builder's hat.
Classic.
And carrying a little wooden toolbox.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this opportunity to spend 3 or 4 months in a full scale manufacturing facility of like crazy scale of manufacturing was really just an amazing experience to see what it was like in the real world outside of school, and that experience really defined for me that the manufacturing was where I wanted to end up. Outside of college, whether it was me pursuing my own dream or doing something entrepreneurial, or whether it was working for someone. I knew being a manufacturing engineer was going to be my focus. So that following summer, I was really interested in spending more time making stuff and working with CNC machines. I got some experience with it at school, but an hour a day, twice a week really was not.
I've
filling
been
my
there.
need. Yeah.
I used to be the shop monitor at WPI. I took the CNC classes, and I'll tell you, like, I wasn't good at it. I could make the thing, like, if you gave me the assignment, I could eventually make it. But it doesn't mean I did it the first time. It doesn't mean I actually understand what I'm doing. I'm just following the steps.
Yeah, and you were probably still getting into the phase where safety was becoming a much bigger thing in schools. But by the time I reached college, there were no shop hours after hours. There was no access to
especially
it
in
for
Boston.
personal projects.
Around the time that I was in school, it was probably around like 2008 or 9. I remember there was a girl at MIT working on a lathe, and her hair got caught in the lathe, and she died. She was killed by the machine. It was a very preventable mistake. And whether or not there was somebody in the shop as a monitor, like maybe that would have saved her, maybe not. But, these are really dangerous machines.
Yeah, and it's very true. But it seems like so much of now it's just became so complicated for schools to allow students to have just free reign of these or access to these machines after hours, that now there's really no ability to use them for personal projects or extracurricular stuff, which is kind of crazy. Like, that's where you really learn, or if someone's really passionate about it, like anybody like me would love to spend some extra hours in there in the evening making some widget or doodad and learning more about doing it. But
so naturally, you're not allowed to use their equipment. So what do you go out and do, David?
Yeah, so I did some browsing of little hobbyist machines. There's if you know manufacturing or manufacturing YouTube space, you probably heard of Tormach, which are these fairly small kind of desktop CNC machines. So I was looking at one of those and really thinking that way, and then I was following this Instagram account of this guy Jay Pearson, who makes work holding products, and he actually has a very similar story to me. Like, went into college, he actually ended up dropping out of college, bought his first mill while he was in college used, and started making parts, and now has a very, very real manufacturing work holding company, and has probably 6 or 8 employees and 10 machines. So it was interesting to kind of hear, like, oh, this guy who's gone through the same process I've gone through is now selling this used machine. And it was definitely a stretch, but it was one of those opportunities of like, okay, maybe I'm not just going to take a baby step here. Maybe I'm just going to jump full into this and
shocking,
see where
David.
It goes.
Shocking that you jump full in.
Yeah. So then I went from being like, oh, maybe I'll do this in a garage at my parents' house in New Hampshire to maybe I'll try and find a shop space and rent it out and actually make some parts instead of just mess around with it. And I had actually already owned one kind of clapped out 80s CNC mill that used floppy disks and stuff, and kind of got it running. But I was definitely wanting something that was modern and took modern day programs.
There was also very little in the way of safety on that old mill.
Yeah,
that was a scary device.
Yeah, that thing was clapped out.
Like, I will say, I'm glad that you took the leap just from a safety standpoint, because, I mean, it's like the equivalent of daily driving, like an MGB versus a Tesla. Like, you're probably going to die in the MG.
Yeah, completely. So I found this machine and I talked to him and made it work and put a deal together and I actually went out and saw it while I was meeting some friends out in California. So I saw the machine and everything. And then I think there was maybe six or 8 weeks between when I committed to the machine and bought it to when it actually arrived. And at that point, I didn't have anywhere to put it. I didn't know how to turn it on. I didn't know how to put a tool in it. It was a Haas mill, so it was quite a bit more advanced than the machines that we were using at school even. So then I started watching a ton of YouTube videos and absolutely binging.
Pressure's on. So wait, where did it go? Where was it delivered originally?
Between that time, I found the shop that we ended up being in
So
Cambridge.
it was in transit, and you were like,
yeah,
I'll give you an address.
So the guy who I bought it from, he was moving shops as well. So he said it could stay at his shop for like 3 or 4 weeks. And the day that the riggers were coming to move all of his machines into the new shop was the day that it had to leave and come to me. So there was like 4 weeks there, and then it took a couple weeks for it to come out to me. So
and that's where we got old Rennscot, the first building.
Yeah. So it is so hard to find small rentable commercial shop space or anything like that. So I think I ended up finding the place I went to on Craigslist, and that's like the go-to place.
I found every car I've ever bought, I found on Craigslist.
Yeah.
So
The
I
Defender,
guess commercial real estate too. Hey, what the hell?
Yeah. If you're looking for like a small shop space, like Craigslist was the place. There's kind of a Zillow equivalent for commercial, but it's more for like big commercial, like 20,000 square foot buildings,
Right.
not for a 2,000 square foot bay in an industrial complex or anything like that. And then I think we maybe found that with like a week and a half or 2 weeks to go until the machine was showing up. So had all my friends help paint the walls, put some Home Depot epoxy on the floor, got air lines in, got a compressor that was definitely undersized for the machine. And
Oh God, that thing was always running.
Yeah, that thing's had a hard life. And yeah, basically had everything together. And then one day the machine showed up and put it in the corner and tried to figure out how to turn it on and put a tool in it. And honestly, it was like 2 or 3 weeks before I figured out how to set a work coordinate system.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like it's intimidating. I mean, you're getting this thing and you're supposed to just be like, here we go, I have a business now. But it's like, wait, I need to actually use it.
Yeah, and there's so many buttons.
There are.
So many buttons, so many menus. But
it was a Haas Mini Mill, right?
Yeah, Haas Super Mini Mill 2 from 2014. But eventually, through YouTube videos and asking teachers at school and whatnot, I figured it out and broke a bunch of tools and actually started making some parts and getting some chips flying, which was so scary, but at the same time, like so exhilarating and so exciting.
As a friend, I hated the idea of you alone in a shop with that tool, with that machine.
Yeah.
Like that was frightening. I'm like, oh my God. Every time I was there and you were like, okay, I'm like, I'm going to head out. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to stay late. I'd be like, oh God.
Yeah. And I guess we should also preface this by saying that the school that I went to, because of the co-op program, I had a summer term. So I was in classes during this as well, trying to juggle delivery of a machine and building out a shop while also still doing classes and trying to figure out what I was actually going to make on this machine. Didn't really have that figured out yet. Kind of just bought a machine.
Yeah, you bought a machine without like a plan. You like, it wasn't like, hey, I've got this thing, proof of concept. I've got these guys manufacturing it. And by the way, you know what? Maybe if I just made these myself, or if I could rapid prototype, I could do this a lot cheaper. In fact, no, you were just like, I want to make things, which is like,
Well, I wanted to learn how to use a machine.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's still always a motivator, and at least it's starting to look promising that following that as your guiding light is actually a way to form a somewhat real business. So
I don't hate it. I mean, look, I'm kind of that guy too. Like if somebody handed my dad just handed me a camera. I always wanted to take photos and stuff, but like I was handed cameras when I was a kid, and I just wanted to take pictures. I wanted to, and then it became a video thing, but it was never like, I wasn't like renting cameras, and I wasn't like figuring out how to do that. It was just like, no, give me a camera. I'll figure it out. I'll make it happen.
Yeah. And really, there's two ways that a business functions, right? You either make a product or you offer a service. And when it comes to offering a service, you kind of got to figure out a way to differentiate yourselves from your competition or who's around you. So that was really kind of what those first several months were about, was figuring out like what our niche was, what we were going to be good at, and what our customer base was going to be like. And I think based on what we were able to produce in the early days, that's really what led us to finding more customers on the contract manufacturing side. I think with us having those unique skills of, oh, wow, you make like one-off or small run automotive parts, like nobody does that, is really what has led us to actually have a business based on this idea of, oh, like just having a skill or just learning how to use a machine.
So let's go backwards a little bit, because what if anyone knows Rennscot, they know you probably from remote reservoir mounts or those harness collars. But there was a product before those, and it had nothing to do with that mini mill. And I remember that's what you really wanted to make.
Yeah. So there was this idea to try and make forged mirror caps for Lamborghini Huracan Performantes.
It's a forged carbon, right?
Yeah, forged carbon mirror caps, which was based off the idea of everything on this car. It's the most premium version of the Huracan. Every carbon part on it is forged carbon, but for some reason on the Performantes, the mirrors were only in black.
I thought this was genius. Not necessarily that like you would make this. I thought that was going to be very complicated and expensive, and I didn't know how you were going to do it. But that's your thing. You're good at figuring things out. But the fact that you looked up and down at this car, I think me and you had gone down to Pittsburgh, right? That's when we had seen Dr. M3's Purple Monte. And I walked away having driven it and looked at it, and I fell in love with it. And I think the only thing you had to say was, how come the mirror caps aren't forged carbon?
Yeah. Well, like why aren't they at least body color? But yeah, so I kind of noticed this niche in the market, and I'd actually heard like a couple months previously a friend who knew a guy who was making stuff out of forged carbon, who was local to us, and he wasn't even just doing it the like hacky way. He was doing it the actual way of making two molds and pressing the parts together, doing it similar to like an injection molded part. And I saw some of the material and I compared it to actual forged carbon Lamborghini parts, and it was very, very much so the same look aesthetically. And so I bought a set of Lamborghini mirrors off of eBay, and we went through the process of laser scanning them and designing the product, which all of that was outsourced, which is crazy because nowadays we could do that in-house.
Yeah, you're like the laser scan king.
Yeah, it's like a big portion of our business now. And so, it's kind of crazy because we outsource this, and now looking back at it, we kind of got screwed pricing wise. But anyhow,
that's kind of funny.
But you
learned that was even a service.
Yeah, exactly. I had kind of heard of laser scanning, but I don't even remember how I ended up finding the guys who we ended up using. I might have just Googled them and ended up finding the company that scanned these mirrors for us and created the models that we used for reference for these mirror caps. And then the manufacturer that I was using for those, they did all the design work, but they took forever and really struggled on it. And actually now I think in hindsight, nowadays, if we were doing the same project, we could do all the design work in-house. To kind of jump to the end of that story, ended up being that the manufacturer took, I think the initial contract was set for like 10 weeks till delivery for when the contract was signed. And about 10 months later, no parts had been made and the tooling hadn't even been made. And it turned out the manufacturer that was supposed to make the tooling to make the parts had gone out of business. So it was a big shambles. So and by that time, a bunch of other companies, 1066 or whatever the big Lamborghini carbon fiber manufacturing company is now came out with theirs, and a couple other companies had as well. So
it was no longer like this niche product that like, ooh, if you come to Rennscot, you'll get these things.
Yeah,
hey, Lamborghini owners.
No, and the whole basis of it was trying to be the first to market. But even though that first business plan didn't end up working, it was a great experience to kind of learn what this process is actually like, and learn what putting a contract in place is, and finding a manufacturer and designing a part, and trying to figure out how to sell something, and projecting sales volumes, and figuring out what the MSRP should be on the part and how much the part's going to cost, and figuring out margins and overhead costs.
Even though like you could say, oh, the part objectively failed, you literally learned how to run a business.
Yeah,
from
I
that
learned,
part.
Yeah, exactly. So back to everything. You know, it was all. If the actual plan doesn't end up working, at least you can come out of most things learning a ton, and that definitely was the foundation of learning of entrepreneurship. The Rennscot was based off of.
Well, and that's what I like about what you're doing here too, is because the word entrepreneurship gets thrown around a lot now, and every other Instagram page is model/entrepreneur. It's like, no, you are a freelancer. And you know, like these are people who are just getting paid to do a thing, but you know, you are the only like actual entrepreneur that I know. I mean, maybe that's not true, but you're the only person that I can look at and be like, I would give you that title, and I wouldn't like let anyone make fun of that, because I know a lot of people will say like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. Like for me, you know, I do YouTube, I do this thing. I could say I'm an entrepreneur, but like I'm not. I mean, yeah, I have business cases for what I'm doing, and on a very, very like basic scale, sure, you could say that. But for the most part, I provide a service, I create a product, whether that's video, photo, whatever, and I sell it to a client. Or I'm selling it for ad space on YouTube, or for sponsors. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast, please let me know. But, you know, all of those are learning experiences too. You know?
Yeah. And there's definitely facets of what you do. You know, selling stickers, that's pretty entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
But creating content for someone else would definitely probably fall under the freelance category. So, you know, there's bits of entrepreneurship there.
So after that fails, what's next? Because your brain is like insane. It's funny because I would love to be able to say you're one of those people who never sleeps, but you're like a cat. You actually sleep a lot. It's just that when you're awake, you're nonstop insane. And when you do sleep, you are a rock. And I can attest to that because I have done many road trips with you, and I have had to try to get you out of bed.
Yeah.
It's a difficult task.
Yeah, I would definitely, and especially in that first summer, there were definitely quite a lot of late nights, but I make up the sleep. Sleep is definitely one of those priorities for me. And I function probably 10 times better with plenty of sleep than not. So it's probably a good decision anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then I went through that summer of being in school, plus starting a business, plus learning how to use a machine and figuring out what I was actually going to make on it.
Yeah, there's nothing like paying rent on a pretty massive, for what we were doing, what you were doing, it was a pretty massive space.
Yeah. Couple thousand square feet, which quickly became full once we fit a car lift into it, and a car and a couple of machines. But it was definitely a big undertaking, and especially as just a one-man band, I quickly realized that wasn't going to be the long term for me to just be by myself. And then that summer, the idea of, so I had another co-op coming up in the fall, so I was looking for co-op opportunities, but really being like, really what I want to do during this time is focus completely on my business instead of trying to take on a co-op while working on Rennscot. So I ended up talking with my school and pitching the idea of an entrepreneurship co-op, and I took it really seriously and wrote a strong proposal for it and laid out the groundwork of how it would work with a mentor and someone to overlook me and to report back to, and they went for it. So I ended up spending that fall doing an entrepreneurship co-op, being the first entrepreneurship co-op to ever happen. And now there's a running entrepreneurship program at the school. There's 2 entrepreneurship programs per year.
That's amazing. So for your co-op, you ran your own business.
Yeah. So I did an entrepreneurship co-op, worked on the business, and reported back to a business professor about the business side of things, and then had another mentor who I talked to about the manufacturing side and the processes and project design and stuff like that.
And again, the two products that you end up coming up with in that time are very similar to the same idea, where you looked at what most people see as a supercar and go, wow, a Huracan Performante, it's the pinnacle of the Huracan. Mm-hmm. Instead of looking at it and saying, oh, that's perfect, you go, oh, it needs mirror caps that match the thing. And you're like, okay, Rain Man. Well, instead you do the exact same thing and you look at your Cayman and you go, these zip ties are stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. So I spent, from when we got, or from when Rennscot started doing manufacturing, or when I knew that machine was showing up, I just spent the next 6 months with my eyes wide open to see what were possible product ideas, because I knew that would be a great foundation to fill times between taking on work for other companies, and a great opportunity to learn to go through the full cycle from idea to design to prototype to product development to then actually making a product and actually having it ready to sale. So basically the idea of where are places where zip ties are used where an actual purpose-built mount would be much better. So the two things that came up were a mount to mount the remote reservoirs for coilover suspension. I thought it was crazy that people were spending $8,000 on suspension and then mounting their reservoirs with 2-cent zip ties,
and totally acceptable.
Yeah, and that was
look under
the
hood.
norm.
Everyone's like, look at I just spent it's like $7,000 on this remote reservoir setup. It's adjustable right here, and they're literally held in by zip ties.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. You use top hats that cost $600 a pair, and then hold the reservoirs on with zip ties. And I feel like so many people have probably bought coilovers and then ended up with the stage where it's like, okay, it's installed. What do I do with this canister thing? Like, just zip tying on seems so hacky.
Yeah.
So the idea for a mount for those came up, and it took a while to really figure out what it was even going to look like. There's versions of it and prototypes that we still have that look so different than what it is now. And one of the big tools that we leverage a lot is trying to find a partner to develop products with. So usually that's a shop that specializes in whatever make it is or the product, and really get their feedback, because they have years and years of experience of mounting these. So we worked with a shop called Catchell Motor Company, KMC, that's right near us in Lawrence, Mass.
Yeah, our good friend Tim. Hopefully, I'm hoping Tim will come on the podcast, because I have a lot of questions for him, actually.
Oh yeah. You might have a couple podcasts there.
Yeah, he has too much knowledge of like Porsche stuff. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Tim was someone I had a pretty good relationship with in the Porsche sphere. So I asked him about this product idea, and he was like, "Yeah, actually, that would be great. Like, we spend probably 4 or 6 hours, making a custom set of mounts and bending sheet metal parts and painting them and putting riv nuts in, and it would be so nice to just take a part off the shelf, make the same margin on it, and have it easy to mount." So he was all about the idea and thought it had great market potential as well, but he also had the knowledge of really knowing the direction we should go in with design and making sure that it's aesthetically pleasing, but also performs just how it should be, and making sure there's no performance attributes that we're overlooking.
Yeah.
So he was really like a great resource, and looking at the early designs of it, they were so bad. But
well, you were green as fuck.
Yeah. I had no clue what I was doing. I had access to CAD and no knowledge of how to use it.
Yeah, I mean, like the biggest thing that you could have gotten at the time was just to be like, yeah, I've got a license for SolidWorks.
Yeah. Well, actually, we found Fusion 360, which is like the go-to CAD software.
No shit.
If you want something, well, it's free for hobbyists, free for entrepreneurs. So if anybody out there wants to design parts for their car, that's definitely the way.
Yeah,
to
the price of entry is really high.
Yeah. It used to be extremely high, and honestly, we hit the mark on when to enter this kind of manufacturing sphere. Like, if we were 5 years earlier, we would have had to have bought, or most likely torrent a version of SolidWorks, which if you buy, it's $15,000 for the bare bones setup, and then probably a couple grand a year to maintain it. But Fusion is free for entrepreneurs, free for hobbyists, and once you pay for it, it's like $450 per year for a seat, So the barrier of entry came down a whole bunch. And it's really, really good software. We still use it for everything today. So that product took us a couple months to go through the stages of developing it and coming to a final design. We ended up making it so it used a 3D printed adapter, so we could design it for different makes and models of coilover. Some are hexagon, some are octagon, some are round. They're all different diameters. So the 3D printed adapter was really, really a great way of making the part. So we didn't have to machine 20 different variants. But if someone wants a new variant to us, they check out, pick the custom option, send us an email or put in a note what they want or what the size of it is. And usually we 3D print it overnight and still ship it out the next day, even with it having a custom adapter.
That's insane. And this is all with the ability to use your like laser scan arm on anything.
Yeah. So we use the laser scan arm for a lot of stuff, and then a lot of times we just ask the customer to use a piece of string to measure the diameter if it's round, or we try and get our hands on one to measure it with a caliper or something like that.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been really good. So now we have the variants for pretty much all remote reservoirs nowadays, and then we built it in a way so we were able to add a cage mount to it as well, so you could mount your remote reservoir mount to a cage, which has been super popular. And then same thing there, if someone wants to mount it to some obscure cage size or some strut brace or something like that, they can tell us what the diameter is, and we'll 3D print it overnight and get it out to them the next day. So that's been a really great project and was a great learning opportunity, and it's really amazing to look back and see how much that product progressed.
So what about how's the pandemic impacted the business?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I feel like everyone probably went into it being like, oh boy, we're going into a recession, like everyone's going to stop spending. Turns out it's kind of been true, but at the same time, our best month was March. And we were on a pretty strong growth curve at the beginning of this year, so that definitely carried into March. But we really didn't see a big decline in business during the pandemic or during the first couple months of it. We maybe saw a slowdown in growth, like we weren't seeing the same growth month over month that we'd previously been seeing, but we've been holding pretty steady with the kind of sales that we were seeing in March. So overall, it really hasn't been that bad, and it's allowed us to invest a lot within our business and within our systems, and really implementing implementing some key systems and resources within the business. So it's actually been really good.
What like keeps you up at night? I mean, not necessarily financially, but like, what are the things that you're like, oh man, like we're not necessarily late, or like something that you want that is like a stretch target? Like, I mean, you don't have to divulge like private, proprietary things, but what do you want for the business that you worry about?
Yeah, honestly, not much. I'm like really, really not a big worrier. Like I'll just take stuff day by day, but pretty much if a problem comes up, I know we're either gonna go around it or go through it and figure it out at the end of the day. So I'm really not a big worrier, and so far we've done a really good job of, I feel like most businesses that make their own product, their big thing is like running out of inventory or something like that can cause a whole bunch of stress. But we do a really good job of tracking our inventory and keeping on top of that. So that's really not a big side of it. Honestly, I really wouldn't say I ever, or at least as of recently, I haven't been kept up much, but really I've been like excited more in the morning to tackle some really big kind of business development projects that we've been working on, and trying to pick up some much larger customers and some really big name customers for manufacturing and design work.
That's exciting.
Yeah. So honestly, it was pretty stressful in the beginning of the pandemic, actually. But that was less the stress of what was going on and more just like the unknown of what the future was going to look like. And, I think all business owners went into that being like, I have no clue what the right move is here. Like, should everyone go home? Should should I send a few people home? Like, I think most business owners just had no clue what to even do or make of the situation, because it was obviously new for everyone, but was obviously gonna have a big effect in some way. So that was probably a stressful time. But yeah, overall, as of recently, it's really not been overly stressful. It's just exciting to work through the projects we have in the pipeline.
Well, instead of just talking about the business, you have a couple cars that I think a lot of people would be excited about. If things don't keep you up at night, then I guess it's pretty easy to buy a McLaren, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I ended up buying a 600 LT over a year ago now, which is kind of crazy. And yeah, now has almost 4,000 miles on it. So I'm happy to actually be a driver of it.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely do drive it. I see it out. I mean, hell, I've driven it up in New Hampshire and Vermont and shit, and it's fantastic. It's a fun car. And all right, walk me through the buying, because I remember when you were looking at these cars, you were like, there was a point where you were like, you know what, I'm gonna do it. I'm buying a friggin' supercar, and I would have put all my money on the fact that you were gonna buy a GT3 RS, a 991.2. Or was it a .1 at the time?
I think it was a .1.
I think that one was a .1. And then you called me and you said, I did something else. And you bought 600 LT. And I thought, I mean, frankly, I was like, oh no, bad idea. Because I'm thinking like, A, depreciation, B, reliability, C, what about Porsche, David?
Yeah. Well, so on the same day, I ended up going down to a dealership in Rhode Island to look at a GT3 RS at a Porsche dealership, Porsche Fairfield, and went down.
Wasn't that Connecticut?
Yeah, maybe.
Fairfield, yeah, that's Connecticut.
Okay. So went down there, test drove it, and really enjoyed it. And I'd actually driven a couple before, so it wasn't a brand new experience to me. And then after that, I went to McLaren of Greenwich, to Miller Motor Cars, and I'd already been talking with them quite a bit, quite extensively via email, seeing what they had in, because at that point that was a brand new car. Only a handful of them had really been delivered to the New England area already. So I was kind of interested to see what cars they might already have on the way and see if any were of the spec that I was looking for. And it turned out they actually already had one that was in that they were using as their kind of showroom car. So it had been used for like some customer test drives and had some miles on it. But like by miles, like 600
miles. Yeah.
And, but it was in like the perfect spec, chicane gray, which has an orange flake in it. There's like, you could reduce heavy orange flake.
You could reduce the weight of this car by 10 pounds just by not including the orange flake. There's so much flake on that paint.
Orange brake calipers, orange stitching, an orange seatbelt. So it really, it really was a great looking spec. And so I was happy with that, and that's obviously kind of the first thing to get your foot into the door and looking at a car is whether aesthetically it checks the boxes, and option wise it did as well. So I ended up going down there really with thinking that the GT3 RS was going to be the one that I would end up going for. I knew the LT was going to be a step up from the GT3 RS, but
it's like $100,000 more at the time too.
Yeah, it was.
It was not in the same ballpark. You wouldn't. You would maybe cross shop them somewhat based on performance or like a lap time, but not really. They really aren't competitors.
Yeah, but I also feel like the GT3 RS is too cheap. Same with GT3s, but that's Porsche's decision.
Too cheap as far as like actual asking price.
Yeah. Well, they all punch way above their cost.
Agree.
Like a GT3 is like competitive with a 570S that's GT3 RS price.
But I mean, on the other hand, you've got to look at like the fact that a GT3 is like, you drive a GT3 around town, it's not a sense of occasion. It wears off really quickly because it's a 911 and it drives like a 911. And now that like 991.2s are basically like Volkswagen GTIs at normal speeds, they drive. I mean, literally, if you've driven a Mark 7 Golf or GTI, you know what it's like to drive a 991.2 at low speeds. You really do.
Yeah. I just feel like a 991.2 GT3 RS was pretty much worth what they actually were charging, which was like 240 grand for a good spec.
That was a big step up from the .1.
But even then, like, 280 grand competitive to 600 LT wouldn't be that out of place, especially saying the next step in the GT lineup is GT2 RS.
It's
400 grand.
Different world.
So there's literally nothing between 250,000 and 400 grand, which is kind of nuts. You can buy a GT3 RS and a GT3 for the same price as a GT2 RS. So I just feel like there's kind of a hole in the market there, and they could separate the gap between a GT3 and a GT3 RS a bit more.
Well, I think I didn't understand the 600 LT until I saw it and until I drove it, and then I was like, wow.
Yeah, and that being said, the kind of thought process behind it was, I already owned a Porsche and really enjoyed it and really understood what that brand stands for and means. And McLaren really seemed like the next logical step up from that. The next logical step was either into a GT Porsche, or one above that would be a McLaren, specifically an LT variant. There were really no other brands in the class that really interest me or follow the same kind of thought process that I would want out of an automaker. Ferrari and what they stand for really isn't what I care about when it comes to a car. I bought the LT based on its driving ability and its driving feel.
I agree. I think obviously McLaren has a lot of folks talking about resale values, talking about the health of the business. I know they've been struggling through the pandemic. That's for sure. Like that McLaren is one of the few automakers that I'm like, ooh, what's going to end up bailing them out? Whether it's a buyer, whether it's an investor, whether it's like a sudden success of a new variant, like I don't know what's to come for McLaren. Aston Martin had someone swoop in, right? And there's money on the table now.
Yeah. And I think McLaren, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up with investors swooping in to help them out. But they've also, during their most recent earnings call or report, they gave some pretty promising information on how they were going to restructure the business in not completely, but in smaller ways. Mostly they're letting go of like 1,200 employees, which is going to help them have quite a bit less overhead. But
hopefully those weren't all the paint guys.
Yeah, I know. Hope not.
We're gonna have
I'm sure MSO was well protected. Is probably a cash cow for them.
Everyone gets primer.
Yeah, I know, right? But they also announced that they are thinking about dropping their production numbers, and they even stated that part of the reasoning for that was for their customers' investment in the cars. So
that's kind of wild to see that written.
Yeah,
I've never seen anything like that.
And especially something like that, when they put that out, that was a very well edited and written document. So
and it's like
it wasn't a mistake.
Legitimate corporate acknowledgement that like, oh my God, we keep undercutting our customers every time we come up with a variant.
Yeah, and I understand why they were doing what they were doing. Like, I'm sure they were just hoping that they were going to end up in a Ferrari situation where they were going to end up with more demand than they were producing, but it just never happened. And it's kind of funny because it's a bit of a catch-22 where them producing more cars kept more people from buying them because of the scared of depreciation.
Yeah.
When really they just need more people to come over. So I think we'll see post 765 LT, hopefully a bit of a change in McLaren in them really having quite a bit more loyalty towards their existing customers and just producing less volume so there's more demand. Like, that's the basis of any company that makes a luxury good, is either you have to produce less than the demand is, and that's how you're able to keep prices up, or you're just going to have so much interest in the product that you can charge whatever you want and people just pay for it, which is kind of the lucky position the Ferrari's in, but only really Ferrari. The other option would be to go the Aston Martin or Lamborghini route, where you end up producing an SUV or something that's a cash cow, that's in volume, that people are buying with the knowledge that it's going to depreciate, but people just aren't really caring, or nobody buys an SUV even if it is a $300,000 one.
And we've still yet to see if that's going to work out for Aston Martin.
Yeah, we've yet to see it, but at least the initial information about that car looks really good and pretty promising.
It does. It's funny because a lot, I've posted, I did a special thing, walk around thing with the DBX with a pre-production car, and you get the comment section on the YouTube, and they're just, oh, it's a Ford Focus. Oh, it's just like this. Why would anyone spend this money? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, the people who are buying them don't necessarily care what you think. They care about the quality product. And it's like, if you're a loyal, an Aston Martin loyalist, then having a DBX is going to be a really intriguing prospect for you.
Yeah, it completely is. And Lamborghini has really been the one to prove that this model, even though as purists and enthusiasts kind of hate it, it's great for us.
Holy crap, did the Urus work? The Urus is...
I think they've produced like 7,000 of them or something last year. And I think in like 2015, they produced like 5,000 cars total. So like, now Lamborghini has money. They have the money to put it into their development of their sports car. The Urus was basically just a
SQ8.
Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, whatever.
Well, if anything, it probably
fag group car you want to.
It probably helped SQ8 sales because Urus is not a cheap car. That's like it's a way above an SQ8. You go get an SQ8 and you're like, look, I basically drive an actually good-looking Urus.
Yeah.
No offense, Urus. It's just extreme. It's a little sharp and ridiculous.
Yeah. And the Urus has a proven platform, so you aren't actually buying a Lamborghini in quality or reliability. That being said, pretty much all Lamborghinis other than Aventadors are basically just Audis nowadays. So
yep.
They're pretty reliable all around. But that business model really makes a lot of sense. You mass produce the one car that you can get away with mass producing and selling for a hefty profit, and you put that money into keeping afloat the purists and the real enthusiasts and the real reason why people are even buying your SUV, which obviously is the sports cars or supercars. So,
and we can all thank Porsche for paving the way with the Cayenne.
Yes.
All hail the Cayenne.
Yep. And now the Macan.
Yeah.
Which all of us secretly like.
I thought the Macan, when the Macan came out, and I'm not going to dive too deep in this, but that was like the best looking car Porsche even came out with. The Mark I Macan, whatever you want to call it. So good.
Yeah, it's like they nailed it with that car.
I think
as Porsche does.
I think when Nissan saw the Macan, they went, "Oh, that's what we wanted the Rogue to be back in the day, or the Murano." They wanted because they wanted that. They used a phrase that I hate. I hate it when people call the city a concrete jungle. Drives me nuts. But they wanted it to be like the non-off-road SUV for the street. It's for the concrete jungle. And then, it was many years later that Porsche comes out with the Macan, but it's like the Macan just made the best Murano. So before we wrap up, what's next? Whether it's for the business, whether it's for your own personal cars, what's on your mind? Because I know the wheels are always turning, and if I don't ask, I don't find out.
Yeah. Well, the big thing business-wise is picking up some much bigger customers. We want to end up doing some work for boutique OEMs, small volume, full car manufacturers.
Yeah.
So the likes of Pagani or Koenigsegg or companies like that.
That'd be really cool to see your parts in those cars.
Yeah. That's really the niche that we're going for, and we've started the discussion with a couple, or specifically one auto manufacturer, about supplying products for them, and we're kind of getting into the early days into their process. So. That's super exciting, and we have a couple other bigger projects for customers that are in the pipeline. Specifically, we have a customer who's a little crazy, but is wanting to build a XJR14. I believe that's the right.
It sounds like it's either a Jet or a Jaguar.
It is a Jaguar, but it's a Jaguar Le Mans car from the 90s, and he has a toy model of it and wants us to design the body for a full-size car.
Wow.
Yeah, and this guy's actually super interesting, but he in the recession of 2009 made the very smart decision of buying up a whole bunch of, if I remember correctly, M120s, which is the Mercedes V12 engine that's in the Zonda. So he has like 5 of those that he bought up in 2009 when they were real cheap and gas was expensive and nobody wanted V12s.
Those are 7-liter V12s, right?
Yeah, I believe so. They came out of SL65.
Yeah.
So that's what's going in this as well. So
wow.
It's going to be crazy looking and sound equally as crazy, and will be a really cool project to be a part of. And he's actually a guy who's done a whole bunch of other projects. He's rebuilt himself a replica GT40. He has a project with a 1GZ, which is basically two JZs put together to make a V12. So this guy's got a V12 problem.
I love it. What a good problem to have.
I'm a fan.
I'm so thankful there's people like that in the world. And I'm thankful there's people like you in the world, because you have encouraged me to do things that I am too scared to do. I jump in the deep end and just try it. And I do thank you for that. And, you know, you've continued to be a source of inspiration and stress in my life, because usually I'm terrified by every move you make. I'm like, David!
I'll keep on pushing.
But thanks for being here. And that's going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for listening to the Respect the Drive podcast. And I mean, I guess, does it need to be said? Don't forget to respect the drive.